Not exactly how we saw that being drawn up yesterday as the Bengals lose a really, really frustrating game to the New England Patriots, one that they were heavy favorites despite a lot of issues, injuries, that sort of thing coming into it. Home opener, season opener, Bengals drop, lay an egg, really, 16-10 on their home turf. And I'm Anthony, he's John. This is the Orange and Black Insiders episode called The Aftermath, where we kind of break down a little further everything we saw, give some opinions, etc. Again, I'm Anthony, he's John. John, man, that was a clunker yesterday, and that's putting it kindly.
I always like the exact adjective that we use to describe these things. The one that stands out to me is the whole open and orange thing. It was like, oh, it's excitement, it's like rejuvenation, and it was the complete opposite of that. So maybe that's a one and done for the sake of making sure that Elizabeth Blackburn doesn't look like an idiot when talking about what the purpose of being in all orange is. But yeah, the exact opposite. But hey,
they look good.
They did look good, but I mean,
but the football part didn't, but the uniform part did.
I mean, what is new about the Bengals losing a game that they should win? You know, a tiger never fully changes his stripes.
Right. Look, I'm going to go, I don't want to say a tirade or anything like that, but I'm going to just kind of give some opening thoughts and opinions of what I saw yesterday. There are a handful of games in the Zach Taylor / Joe Burrow era that I can name that were, the most frustrating games to watch. Obviously all losses. When you're not really frustrated when you win. I mean, there are frustrations, but you're not frustrated. So I think back, and I'm just kind of going through the Rolodex a little bit. The week 2 loss to Chicago in 2021, that was just a maddening, particularly as they fought and clawed their way to a win the week prior. By the way, that win against Minnesota, the only win for Zach Taylor in his tenure as Bengals head coach in weeks 1 and 2 to start a season. That was the only win. Additionally, I would say the Tennessee game last year where the Bengals, they got stomped and nothing was going right. Halloween game against Cleveland a couple of years ago when Chase just was hurt right before that one. And, that was just a debacle of a game. And then this one, I mean, you can debate about the order. To me, and I'm not in the locker room, and I'm sure if some of the guys in there, love all of them, this isn't an indictment on them personally or anything like that. As you said, the day was supposed to be filled with excitement and energy, new uniforms, a winnable game on the slate, your home opener. This is kind of supposed to be that redemption year. I didn't see a lot of excitement or really enthusiasm, at least from, and again, I wasn't there. I wasn't in the locker room. I just didn't see a lot of excitement. And quite honestly, John, it was one of the most boring outputs of football that I've seen the Bengals make on offense and in the Zach Taylor era. Had trouble throwing past the sticks. Running game gave you a couple nice plays, but pretty pedestrian there. Tackling was just an unbelievable issue. And the self-inflicted mistakes, and we can go through the litany of them, John. I mean, and unfortunately, many of them were from your new additions that you brought in, right? You had Gesicki that looked like a tough catch, but it looked like he should and could have come down with that ball in the back corner of the end zone there. We all kind of thought it was that at first, and the replay showed him kind of bobbling it at the end and it hitting the ground. So there's an error there. One play later, Tanner Hudson, who you relied upon pretty heavily last year, completely careless with the football. 10-point swing ensues there. He's walking into the end zone. You have Geno Stone dropping an interception in the end zone. There are just missed tackles. Joe Burrow kind of opting for checkdowns instead of kind of going deep on some plays. Charlie Jones in the punt return game, not only a fumble, but another late punt return that he fielded at his own 5-yard line. It's just mental errors, it feels like, careless with the football towards the goal line, fielding that punt so deep late in the game when you're needing some extra field position because of time, and unforced errors. And to me, I get it's week 1. There's a ton of time to rectify everything. I'm just kind of sick of this same song and dance early in the season and the lackluster performances. This is a game you could and really needed to win based on who you play this coming week, and Bengals just completely dropped the ball, figuratively and literally.
I mean, you asked what was there to be excited about. What's there to be excited about? 3 straight 3-and-outs, right? And then turning it over once you get to the red zone for the first time. I think the energy in the building was pretty dead by the time the second quarter came around, when they realized what type of game that was going to be. And Zach said it Monday in his presser. The Patriots ended up controlling the game, and that was the only possible way that they were going to win, because despite the defense missing, I believe, officially 13 tackles, according to Pro Football Focus, Jacoby Brissett didn't necessarily play well. I think the Bengals secondary did a good job of funneling everything to the middle, and the defense gave them a chance to win at the end of the game. We could talk about that exact issue in terms of tackling that continues to be recurring, but I kind of thought about, and I think Dan the Man said this in the comment section, this was very reminiscent of 2022, the opener against the Steelers, when Joe Burrow threw 4 interceptions, and I believe like the first pass that he threw was an interception in that game.
Yep.
You had turnovers completely changed the dynamic of that game against an unimpressive offense in the visiting team, and yet you still had a chance at the end of the game to go down the field and score a touchdown to win the game. And of course, it was tied, and then you had Mitchell Wilcox snap for Clark Harris because Clark Harris got injured previously. It was a bad snap and went to overtime. The same exact situation could have occurred because you were down 6 with the ball, albeit well deep in your own territory with just over 2 minutes to go, and you go 3-and-out. And of course, you're not going to go for it on 4th and 5 at your own 10 when you can barely trust your offense to gain 4 yards in general. So it was from start to finish completely stagnant on offense. Zach was trying to say that they gained some rhythm in the middle of the game in regards to like the couple scoring drives that they had, but even still, like, it's so tough to score, and we've talked about this for years now. It's so tough to score without explosive plays. Like, those drives were 12 plays, like 9 plays, methodically but slowly moving the ball down the field against a defense that wasn't doing anything particularly impressive. They had good coverage with their cornerbacks. Christian Gonzalez played well, but the offense line held up well, and your run game ended up making some noise, at least later on in the game. This was an indictment on the passing game and how the quarterback played. And I think the biggest thing that we need to talk about, Anthony, is that even with a full training camp and pretty much a full offseason and getting all those reps and even playing in the preseason, the same issues are recurring for Joe Burrow in the beginning of the season. And I don't really think we can blame it on the recovering or coming back from injury this time.
Well, let's pause that for a second, because I want to get to that. Just a couple of other new footnotes on this game here. The Bengals pass rush. Trey Hendrickson had a lot of pressures. I think his pass rush win rate was in the 40 percentile, something like that. He was playing well. Had Brissett in his grasp, I think once or twice at least. Brissett got away and did some things. Everywhere else, the Bengals struggled getting pressure. Rankins up the middle, not really. BJ Hill had a couple of nice plays. Tufele had a couple of nice plays against the run. But I mean, overall, you look at it and you go, man, where's the pressure? Dax Hill had a sack on a blitz. Logan Wilson had a hit, I think, also as well. I mean, they were having trouble just generating pressure without blitzing, right? So that in itself is a problem. And I know there's been some rumblings, myself included. I put out a tweet saying, oh man, I looked at Joe Mixon's stat line. This isn't a call to say, hey, Bengals made a mistake getting rid of Joe Mixon, or I want Joe Mixon back necessarily, anything like that. At least not for me. I know others have put some stuff out there about it. I think the only thing that I was thinking about with that is it's kind of a little bit of a symbol of the Bengals have banked on this committee approach at the running back spot, at the defensive interior defensive line spots. And when you see that, when you see that stat line elsewhere and you see what the Bengals did and allowed in the run game from their opponent, you go, oh man, was that, was the committee approach the right approach? Zach Moss had some nice moments. Obviously, the lone touchdown for the Bengals. Regardless, the mix and stuff, that's a total side point. I let's get to what you were just talking about with Joe Burrow, because this is kind of the scary thing, because what you also saw was him, working that wrist, looking like it was either tightening up or fatigued or what have you. I some of you know, if you've listened to a while, a few years ago, I had tricep. You can probably see the scar here. I had triceps tendon surgery. I'm a guy who lifts weights and tries to stay active and stuff. I mean, I'm 15 years older than Burrow or something like that, and this thing tightens up on me. I feel it, right? And so him coming back, and I had this done probably 2.5 years ago now. Him coming back as soon as he did, I mean, there's going to be some tightness, maybe some swelling, maybe not, 100%, particularly as he's throwing as many times as he's thrown. I mean, you mentioned the practices and playing in the preseason. Well, that was on a pitch count. This was the first time where he was not. So I don't know, worried because he was kind of doing that deal with his wrist and working it out, and or just what you saw in his approach in this game, John.
I don't think the wrist was necessarily an issue. I think we've known this since May, that inflammation, tightness was going to be a thing that he deals with for the majority of the season. I think during training camp, we saw him wear like the glove, and that was a whole saga, and just continuing to make sure that it was loose and warm and whatever the case may be. It's going to be a thing for the foreseeable future. It's why he's still on the injury report. He was listed obviously as full participants, throughout the week. But if he gets treatment, he still has to be listed. That was the whole thing last year when, and all of a sudden, kind of popped up out of nowhere and people thought it was a conspiracy. He's going to deal with inflammation. That's just natural. Anyone would have to do that. But it's not going to limit how much he can throw the ball or how he can push the ball down the field. He did try to push the ball down the field at times in this game. It just wasn't enough. And I think people equated that to be like, oh, is he concerned about his wrist and whatnot? I don't think so, because when he did, it didn't look like he was holding back. It looked like there was enough zip on the ball. You talk about like he tried to target Trent Irwin in the end zone, rolling out of the pocket. I think the first down he completed was kind of a bullet pass on the run to Andre Yoshivas. There were times when he tried to put the zip on the ball down the field. I think for me, though, it was, again, when he's coming back from whether it be injury or, the appendectomy, whatever the case may be, and he's now getting used to live bullets and live reps, it takes him a while for whatever reason to really get reacclimated in the pocket. And that was the problem in this one. And it may have been because he dealt with some sacks early on in the game. 2 of the first 3 drives were essentially ended by sacks that I don't really blame on him. But there were just other reps later in the game where he just got rid of it far too quickly. His eyes dropped. His footwork looked a little shoddy. I don't think that had really anything to do with the wrist. And I know people will equate to that for as long as the wrist remains a thing on the injury report. But the fact that these issues look very similar to in years past, where he was coming off of either a lower body injury or whatever the case may have been, where he wasn't able to practice and take on those reps, I think it just has to be accepted that this is just who he is. And there has to be some type of foundational change in the way that he and the rest of the team prepares leading up to this, because whatever changes they made this year just wasn't enough.
Well, yeah. And there were uncharacteristic moments, like you said, from Joe Burrow, and and maybe we should start calling them characteristic, at least early season characteristic moments, because we have seen this before. We saw it last year a bit. We go, man, he's just, it's just not, the comfort level is not there. He's not seeing the field as well as we've seen him, and he's not, getting those trademark plays as frequently as we've seen. So, there were missed opportunities there. The pass plays that were completed were, aside from a close to a 30-yard completion to Chase there, pretty much everything else was largely unspectacular. You had no T. Higgins, which obviously altered things and your approach in this game. And then, we talked about potentially the tight ends being a little bit more of a focal point in this game. Gesicki drops the one in the end zone. Nothing really from anybody else in this game. So just kind of a bad approach all around on offense, and just not the output that you would expect from this team. And credit to the Patriots defense. They were tackling well. They were aggressive. They were they kind of had a sense of what was coming. And I think, in the pressers, Zach and others have kind of said, well, we took what was given to us, and they played this well and that sort of thing. But I think there were still some shots left on the table, right? I mean, I think there was just some opportunities that they should have went for.
Oh yeah, and I think, to answer the Burrow thing, we've seen him work it out before. By the time October comes around, of course, you'd like it to be figured out a lot sooner. But I think worrying long term about Burrow and these issues is not really on the table, considering this is the same cycle. And in kind of a similar vein, in this game, like despite all of that, they easily could have won if just one thing went the other way, right? If Tanner Hudson just holds on to the ball and tumbles into the end zone like a normal tight end would. If Gesicki, like you said, if he's paid to catch that at the end of the day. It's a contested catch, but he's 6'6". That is right in his wheelhouse. Those are the exact looks that they were ideally trying to go for, and that's just the play that he has to make. Geno Stone would have been a very impressive interception. He had 7 of them last year. Like eventually, you got to bring one in for your new team at some point. Like those are plays that are really just coin flips. And really, the Hudson one is the most abnormal one, because I don't think anyone can possibly explain that. I don't think he has an excuse for that. So, again, one of those plays goes the other way. The Patriots don't have, I think, they got 10 points off of like the totality of it all. And the Bengals win a very ugly one. And this is like a bigger theme, I guess. But we've seen around the league that offensively, teams really do not play well in week 1. let's be real. Like last year was a clear signaling that like offensive, particularly passing efficiency, is down, and it was even worse this year. And yet still half the league finds a way to win. The Lions last night, they ran into a lot of troubles against the Rams, and the Rams probably should have won that game, but the Lions figured it out and they grinded it out a win at the end. And I think that's my biggest point about all of this, because starting fast is one thing, but just finding ways to win when not everything goes your way is a entirely other thing. And that's just something that the Bengals in September have yet to been able to find out. And that could be the difference between making and missing the playoffs. Even if things don't look completely functional out the gate, even if that was the expectation or the hope for this year for the Bengals with a full training camp program and everything like that, even if it does look ugly, you still have to find a way to win. And that's the difference between making and missing a couple of plays.
Well, yeah, you're talking about some other things here, and the Bengals brought in a number of players to remedy some situations that occurred, particularly on defense, right? The interior pass rush needed some help and depth. The back end of the defense needed a little bit more experience, football savviness, football IQ, whatever cliche you want to use there. And you need to get guys, especially towards the back end of the defense, that are tackling better. There were some issues up front with some tackling, but I don't think that was the major issue. I think, maybe once the backs, namely Stevenson, got a couple of yards past the line of scrimmage, it was slip away from another defender, a safety, a corner, linebacker a little bit. It was mostly a little bit beyond the line of scrimmage for the tackling issue, at least from what I saw. But the bottom line, again, we talked about the lack of a pass rush just in general. We've talked about the tackling issues. And then, unfortunately, we didn't mention his name. Trent Brown had a couple of bad moments in this game as well. Pressures allowed, etc. So your new guys are kind of letting you down, and you brought in these guys to rely upon to fix the issues that were so prevalent last year. And it's a little bit of lather, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, with Brown, like it was really like that first pass rep that he had, it was abysmal, and I think he settled in for the most of the rest of the game. Alex Kappa didn't have a good game next to him, and that's going to be something that we have to monitor. But specifically on defense, because that's where the majority of those additions went. Like Geno Stone has never been known to be a good tackler, and that showed up in this game. Dax Hill, that was never really his forte either, and that especially showed up in this game. I think the majority of missed tackles were they were off tackle runs by Stevenson, or they were inside runs that he would cut back to the outside. And then once he got to the edge, there was rarely anyone wrapping up. And that was Sam Hubbard. That was Dax Hill. That could have been Geno Stone. All those guys crashing down to the edge, trying to set it, trying to force back inside and failing to wrap up. Like Dax Hill was victimized at least 2 or 3 times in this game. And that's the difference between Stevenson going for 120 yards or maybe in like a normal world, maybe 80, right? Like so many of his yardage came after first contact or after first touch. And he's a guy that you have to be able to bring down on first contact. And last year, so many missed tackles, specifically in the first 2/3 of the season. Somehow they're able to kind of remedy that as the season went on. But really the only, I guess, plus tackler that you brought in was Von Bell. And yeah, he made a couple of plays and whatnot, but I just the addition of one safety who is, let's be honest, in the back half of his career, like that's not going to completely fix everything. You can get guys lined up and whatnot, but if you run into the same bad angles and bad play recognition and playing slow and just not having good fundamentals, like that's honestly an indictment equally on your personnel and coaching. The fact that this wasn't like a major coaching point for this specific matchup after 8 months of kind of hearing the same old thing about the defense, like that was very discouraging, I would say.
Yeah, and you look at again the investments they made at some of these spots, and it's just like, man, there were just so many of the same problems that we saw, particularly in the early part of last year, that are popping back up here, and that's just not ideal. That is for sure. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe Network in the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Along with our show, we have Bengal Jim and Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, who've had a couple of fun guests. We've had a couple of fun guests the last couple of weeks as well. Hopefully you enjoyed our time with Solomon Wilcots on Friday and then Eric All the week prior. So go check those out if you haven't had a chance to do that. And then 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. They're doing their thing, doing a great job, bringing some strong opinions, as are the coach, Matt Minnick, and the great Willie Lutz, who know ball. And by the way, that episode you're going to definitely want to tune into, because I know Willie's got some strong opinions about what he saw on this last week. So check it out on your favorite audio streamer, namely iTunes, but go subscribe. You have to resubscribe to a new feed because we are on a new network, the Believe Network. Check that out. Subscribe, leave us a review if you can. We appreciate that. And of course, you can, if you like the video side of things, you can subscribe through our YouTube channel underneath John by the Cincy Jungle icon. Click the show icon, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And if you can give us a thumbs up on stuff, we'd appreciate that. Cincy Jungle's Facebook page is streaming. We're streaming through a number of Twitter accounts, and we've got a lot of live viewers right now, so pretty stoked about that. But check us out and check out the channel on the audio side of things, how and where you can. I hate this topic, but it has to be talked about. I talked about a little bit about, enthusiasm or lack thereof, and urgency and lack thereof, and that sort of thing. Again, that's me watching from, 2,500 miles away and on a TV and all that kind of stuff, instead of at the game or in the locker room type of thing. So I could be way off base, but I feel like I've got a decent sense of, body language or that sort of thing. After this game, Jamar Chase was visibly frustrated. And you got to ask the coaches about why I only got 6 targets. Caught all the targets, by the way. You got to, obviously not happy about the contract not getting done after they were pretty close. Players have had to answer questions about this and his own contract. I don't really like the idea of, hey, is this permeating through the locker room? Is this really a distraction? Is this what caused the loss? I don't really want to go there, but the performance begs the question. The lackluster performance on offense begs the question. You saw Chase at one point in the game. He got called for, the 12 men thing, because he was late getting off the field after a 3rd down on a punt. I don't know. Are there residual effects from this whole situation? And here's the reason why I asked this, John. And this isn't just Jesse Bates' contract, and it's all about Jesse Bates' contract deal, right? This offseason has included T. Higgins, it has included Trey Hendrickson, and now it has included Jamar Chase. So there has been a number of players where their contract talks have been kind of a center talking point for a lot of the players in the locker room. You like to think that they're mature enough to tune it out and not let it affect their play on the field, but this is what's being kind of put out there, at least as a narrative.
It's in light of what's happened in recent years with other players, this still feels like an anomaly because extending a player early, like this early in the lifespan of his career and his contract, is typically a success for the Bengals. Like you look at extensions after 3 years, they're typically non-first round picks, and there's typically no real drama of getting it done, aside from the likes of T. Higgins and Jesse Bates. But those guys were different because they were never really that close with either of them, and they kind of knew that they were never going to get to that point. The reports of these negotiations being close were legit. Like they were at the goal line, they were in the red zone of getting this done, and they just needed to tweak a couple things. And I think that's why most people assumed that it would get done. And when it didn't, I think that's when the vibes really started to feel off in terms of just like this is a new kind of fumbling for this front office where this felt like a slam dunk to get. The market was set. You have the money to do this, and don't believe for a second that they don't. The fact that they didn't get this done is really eye-opening to me. And I'm also not going to go as far as to say that had an impact on how the offense played as a whole. I really do think that, Jamar Chase had food poisoning Saturday. That was a legitimate thing. That's why he was the game time decision. That's why Joe Burrow didn't even know he was going to play. That had infinitely more to do with his ability on Sunday rather than just the contract. He said it himself. He was going to play this year, even if he didn't get a deal done. And I really dislike the idea that he didn't go 100% because of the contract, and T. Higgins sat out because of whatever was going on with him. Like both those guys didn't have the ability to play 100%. And T. Higgins couldn't play at all because of his hamstring, a hamstring that we've known has given him prevalent issues in recent years. But yeah, I think it's completely fair to call it a distraction of some level. But in terms of Chase's ability to play, I think that was literally more physical than just the contract. But he's allowed to be frustrated about it, internally. But I think Sunday was more along the lines of not only was he getting back in the swing of things, but again, he was literally sick the day prior.
Yeah, I make no mistake. I'm not implying anything whatsoever about their will to play. He or T. Higgins, despite their contract situations, will to play. That's not at all what I'm implying. It's more just the continuous cloud over the team, right? The continuous talking point about the contracts with it started with T throughout for a long time, and then it kind of just with he and Trey Hendrickson, I don't want to say it settled itself because it really didn't settle itself to the way that they wanted, but it resolved in a way, right? I mean, it just people kind of moved on, and it is what it is, and that's sort of that. And the Chase thing kind of followed here, and you kind of feel like that was done. I mentioned this game earlier. I mentioned the Cleveland game. What was that in 2022? The Halloween game when Chase was out. I can't remember if Higgins was available in that one or not, but
he played.
Chase. Yeah. Okay. So Chase was hurt. That was, I think it was after the Falcons game, maybe, or something like that, where he had the hip flexor deal, and then he was gone for almost a month or something like that. And it was a deal where it was like late in the week, and it was like, oh man, we're scrambled to put a game plan together. I don't want to make excuses because there were a lot of problems across the board. I mentioned all the self-inflicted errors. I mentioned all the different things that occurred in this game that prevented the Bengals to win a game that they more than should have won. But I do think the Thursday injury to T. Higgins, the food poisoning on Saturday to Jamar Chase, I mean, you go, well, we have this game plan. It's centered around those two, right? I mean, that's the game plan. It's going to be around those two guys. And you're like, well, do we have them or do we not? And then all of a sudden this game plan that you've kind of, late in the week, you're like, holy crap, we got to change this whole thing. If we don't have one or both of them potentially. And so I that's where I give them a little bit of a pass, because if you've game planned and you could say all you want about, what we saw on offense, but if you game planned all week with having those two guys in the script and you don't have one and you kind of maybe don't 100% have another, that hinders you. But it sounded like Chase was ready to kind of have a bigger workload potentially when he was saying, you got to ask the coaches why I only got 6 targets.
And just for clarification, I wasn't saying that you were saying those
No,
things.
I know you weren't. I'm playing I'm CYA, cover your, what. So that's what I'm saying.
Weird thing about a podcast, like you're talking to someone, but you're also talking to like a group of people that you want to address without saying like names. And you know what I mean?
An audience you can't see. Yeah.
But you know what the fascinating thing is to me? It's like for the last 6 weeks, the Bengals have not had Jamar Chase, and they've had T. Higgins balling his ass off in training camp, right? And Trent Irwin's taking all of Chase's reps. So for all of camp, you have a vision of how you're kind of playing your offense, even when you get Chase back. But you have so many plays and concepts for T specifically in his specific skill set. And then, like you said, he's not out there for Sunday, but Chase is. So then you have Irwin, who's playing for another starter, and the actual starter that you planned to have out there in the beginning, he's out there, but he hasn't been taking all these reps that the other starter's been taking for the past 6 weeks. So everything's is fumbled. It's flip-flopped and it's chaotic. And like you said, there's no excuses for that, but it really it really establishes this point of like confusion with how the Bengals prepare for seasons, because they're trying to toe the line now of taking it easy and making sure that you have all the guys out there fully healthy for week 1, while also trying to ramp up the intensity to make sure that you don't fall on your face in weeks 1 through 3. And somehow the worst of both worlds happened, where even if you have the quarterback out there, you still didn't have one of your top 2 receivers. You didn't have your top 2 draft picks from this year. You didn't have your top draft pick from last year. Pretty much all of those injuries kind of factored in to how this game kind of went out. And you entered the season banged up anyways, even when you're trying to kind of lighten the load in some areas while you're also trying to ramp things up. It's like, I don't think they have a clear sense of how they want to handle the month of August. And I think this is going to be so fascinating next year as they try to manage this, and just really, they might have to just pick a lane and just go full send, or just be like, no, we want all our guys out there anyways.
Yeah. That was a big criticism of Marvin Lewis, which was like, certain camps, he was doing the Oklahoma drill. Some other coaches call it nutcracker drill, or I don't know, something, there's all kinds of different names for it, but if physical camp, right. And just, and then Zach's kind of been the players coach a little bit. And obviously, rules and regulations about what you can and can't do at camp, and, contact and all that kind of stuff has changed. But then you have Dan Orlovsky, whether or not you, of ESPN, whether or not you take his, I respect him. I don't agree with absolutely everything he says, but I respect him. And, he kind of, I don't like what he really said about the Bengals, calling them basically a finesse team today. And, what they do is finesse. But unfortunately, I mean, that was a little bit what was on display this Sunday. And, I guess I'm just old school mindset, this division, you have to have some semblance of physicality. And so they better change some things up pretty quickly. And in that vein, John, let's talk about how to, maybe the quickest way to improve. And here's an interesting comment. I've been trying to keep up with, all the comments, but I've kind of scrolled up and kind of kept it at this, because Brandon on our Facebook page, on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, put this one here. Don't understand the personnel from Zach Taylor. Where's Jordan Battle, Jermaine Burton? Get the guys in there. Trent Irwin scares absolutely nobody. Trenton Irwin has had some moments. He's had some nice plays, nice games. So I don't want to crap on him too much. I mean, he's not the burner weapon or whatever that some of these other guys are, but he's been a somewhat reliable player for the Bengals here. And I don't know that these two specific players that Brandon pointed out is the answer here, or are the answers to some of the issues we saw Sunday. I'm going to say this. What was it? Joseph Osai, very limited snaps. I think 3 pass rush snaps, I think is what I saw in total. That's your rotational pass rush help at this time, right? Mm-hmm. No camp sample. Zachary Carter's inside. I mean, that guy's got to get in the mix more, right? And the Bengals just kind of were like, okay, Hendrickson only, Hubbard only. Again, just they were it just felt like rely on the veterans in this game, bang your head against the wall and see what comes of it. And it didn't go as planned. Jermaine Burton obviously remains in some sort of a doghouse with the coaching staff and or Joe Burrow. I don't there's that vague trust thing that came up from a report from I believe it was Paul Dehner Jr. right from the Athletic. So Jordan Battle played well towards the end of last year. I know they love, and Lou Anarumo loves Von Bell, but I thought this question here from Brandon was pertinent as to how the Bengals move forward, because they got to improve things at a quick pace and at a high level, because they're going to Arrowhead to face the Chiefs in it's late afternoon, early evening, primetime game, but they've got a mini bye, right? So, I mean, they gotta figure this out.
I mean, for starters, with Osai, it's inexcusable. It's been a common problem with Lunarumo and his overzealousness to overplay Sam Hubbard, who I think needs to be the center of a conversation here pretty soon. Hubbard did not look good. The fact that his whole career has been centered around making tackles at the line of scrimmage, at the point of attack, be one of the best edge-setting run defenders. He looked anything but that. And we already know that he's not the greatest pass rusher on the planet Earth. And the fact that he's getting up there in age, there has to be a conversation about rotating him off the field to increase his effectiveness. Just having him out there for the same workload that he's had for years and years, it's not going to cut it anymore. And Osai needs to be out there more often. And the last time, I think Joseph Osai, well, not the last time, but Osai has had a good history of playing against the Chiefs, and that needs to be a development that they change this time, because the Chiefs' offensive tackles, Jawan Taylor, rookie Kingsley Sumatea, he's the starting left tackle. Those are both types of matchups where a guy like Osai can win and get under his pads. Like we've seen him succeed against Orlando Brown training camp for this exact reason. But improving against the Chiefs comes down to Burrow for me. Like obviously tackling better and making sure that you wrap up Isaiah Pacheco, like that goes without saying. And I do agree with Zach Taylor's assessment. Like defensively, it really does come down to wrapping up and making sure that you kind of rally at that point and avoid being in one-on-one situations at the line of scrimmage. I really thought that J. Tufele and Zach Carter played better than expected, but the fact that you had other guys, like if the point of attack is swallowed up in the middle and they're cutback lanes and you can't make one-on-one tackles, all that is for naught, right? So defensively, it really does come down to just tackling better. I'm sure the cornerbacks will be tested more against the Patrick Mahomes offense, but you cannot play skittish and scared and throw short of the sticks as often as you did against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. Even without L'Jarius Sneed, Trent McDuffie is one of the best young quarterbacks in the game. Steve Spagnuolo, I think, is at this point is unquestionably the best defensive coordinator of the game. This is basically a division rivalry at this point. They know each team knows everyone's schemes and tendencies, and the benefit of playing the Chiefs later in the season has allowed Burrow to kind of regain midseason form and play at his best. Now he's in week 2, and Burrow has really played well in week 2, and he's got to go on the road against one of the best defenses in the league. He just has to just be able to just let it rip and not be afraid to take those one-on-one shots that he had plenty of against the Patriots. It just has to click immediately for him.
The tackling for me, just it is imperative this week that the tackling improves, because when you have, Pacheco and Worthy, and I mean, the list goes on and on. You mentioned Hubbard, and I don't want to just single him out, but there were opportunities where Brissett, things kind of broke down, and Brissett was kind of like, I'm not finding an open guy, and he scrambled. And instead of scrambling and kind of getting wrapped up and not extending for a first down, not getting 5 or 6 or 7 yards, that sort of thing, wrap them up on first contact and go down. There are many times where, whether it was him or Stevenson, where it was just like you had guys with arms around them and they just kind of slid off of them. And so that absolutely, with the team speed that the Chiefs have, they do play physical, but with the team speed and everything, you just cannot afford to play sloppy. You can't. And so the thing that worries me is the Chiefs having that mini bye. Really, despite week one's always weird, so I'm not like, panic button for the Bengals. And we've been there, done that, really, right? With them, where they've been able to bounce back and they play their best ball in November, December, which is what you want, really. But this month, was set up pretty well for them, and you kind of hoped that this first game would be a nice 1-0 start out of the gate. The rest of the division didn't look all that great. The Steelers got a nice win in Atlanta there, which was kind of a little bit of a surprise, but the rest of the division kind of struggled. This week's, I don't know if it's must win, but it's big.
I mean, like the Steelers winning despite no offensive touchdowns, like could have predicted that. That's happened like 5 times in the last 5 years or whatever. It's the same situation as the past couple of years where you feel pretty decent about what week 3 and week 4 have to offer, but going down 0-2 is the exact opposite of sustainable. And it's why very few teams in NFL history have been able to do so, go to the playoffs after starting 0-2. The Bengals were able to do that a couple years ago. They weren't able to do it last year. And it wasn't just because that Joe Burrow missed the final 7 games. Yet, despite all that, we've seen the team in this situation before, and optimism could not be lower at this point for only being 1 week in the year. Of course, 8 months of optimism and anticipation just dies immediately when you lay, in our words, a clunker against a very winnable team. And for whatever reason, this is the exact scenario in which they turn things around and look completely opposite of what they did before. They turn a 180 out of nowhere against really good teams in a big spotlight. It's almost like at this point, when I was watching like the Sunday night game with the Lions and the Rams, I'm like, I'm used to being like, oh, like the Bengals are going to lose in these scenarios, and they don't anymore. They almost always win when most people are watching them against really quality opponents. It's like they relish in those opportunities, specifically coming off of a bad week where it's like everyone's picking against them, and they somehow find a way to do it. The problem is, Anthony, typically that happens later in the season when they have all the kinks kind of figured out already. This is still in the part of the season where not everything is figured out, and this is still like their trial and error. This is their preseason for whatever the case may be, and that still needs to be addressed in the coming years. But it's like both those things are clashing to me. This is a game where the Bengals typically surprise us, but it's also in the time of the year where they typically still lay flat. So I think how those things kind of clash is going to be the fascinating thing to watch.
Zach Taylor's first 2 weeks of the season is Marvin Lewis's week after the bye.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's deplorable, really. It's just like, wow, who is this team? And again, you can debate all you want about, hey, amount of time playing in the preseason, what are the practices and training camp looking like, all that kind of stuff. But these slow starts, while they usually recover very well from them, it hinders them. It really does. And so having this game as early as it is on the schedule now, when we looked and did schedule predictions, it was kind of like, well, this seems like a game that they can win, and the Bengals, and now you look at it and you go, well, it's week 2. They came off of a really bad loss here in week 1. Is this truly winnable at this point in the schedule based on how the Bengals usually play at this point in time? And I don't know. I really don't know. But and I don't know how you feel about this. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, but I mean, is there in your mind any sense of an overlooking a Patriots team that they felt that they, as heavy favorites, et cetera, because they were looking ahead to the Chiefs? I doubt it, but it happens.
It definitely was a case for us. I think no one really expected the Patriots to win except me back in May, but that was with completely different context and circumstances. I don't think it was a thing with the locker room, though. I think everyone was telling them that you guys suck out the gate, and that should have been enough of a message to spur some type of energy. Clearly, it wasn't. Obviously they knew who was going to play, who they were going to travel to the next week, but it's still the first week of the year. Everything is leading up to that. You start 1-0, your season just looks a lot better, and it just feels a lot easier to kind of get through. There was so much motivation to win this game, even against on paper, a lousy opponent, and they couldn't get it done. So I think this is just a hole that they kind of dug themselves, but I don't think it was necessarily looking ahead of the Chiefs.
Well, that's who's on deck. We'll start getting out of here. We talked about a lot of different stuff here, and I don't know. I guess we can kind of end with this, John. Confidence level of the Bengals going forward after this. Is it just, hey, week 1's a fluke? Don't take too much stock in it. all too many areas of concern, and in spots that were predictable areas of concern and will continue to be areas of concern down the stretch, or a little from column A, a little from column B for you?
I think that the main issues that we saw there are not only correctable, but they have been corrected in the past. Like, it's possible that the defense learns how to tackle again. We saw that towards the end of last season. It's not possible. It's not just possible. It's highly likely that Joe Burrow plays better at some point in this season. It could be week 2. It could be week 4. Whatever the case may be. By October, he typically turns it around. My biggest concern, though, is actual player regression. Like we mentioned Kappa earlier, we mentioned Hubbard. Von Bell is also kind of in that conversation too. There might be some areas of this team that I think were a little bit overrated entering this year, and that's something to kind of monitor, because while a lot of the team has changed, there are still players who were either here in 2022, the last playoff run, or they also kind of went out and signed some older guys in free agency, which was also kind of a rarity, and that's typically something that they've kept away from. The fact that they're in the back half of their careers is also something to kind of note as well. So just being honest about player evaluations is something that I think is important. And I think how they kind of performed in week 1 when they were as fresh as they will ever be for the season, that is a little bit alarming. And I think when you enter the season, you don't know everything, and you learn a lot about the state of the team, and a lot of your evaluations end up looking very much incorrect compared to what you thought, because it's all based off of how they've looked in the past, and you don't think that a drop off is coming too soon. But for some players, it may be already happening, and that has to be countered with other players progressing more than you would expect, or just some players progressing at the rate that you would expect. You expect a good game from Andre Oshavas here pretty soon. You expect Chase Brown to be involved a little bit more and involved in some explosive plays. You expect some players to step up and be the players that were expected to take a jump from the beginning, because that helps counter out some talent deficiencies in other areas of the team.
Reasons why I'm optimistic about a turnaround. They've done it before, right? So, I mean, it's like, okay, you're getting guys back at some of these spots that you had questions at, which is defensive tackle. I mean, there's some injuries there, but you're going to get a couple guys back in a few weeks, right? Lessons learned from this one, right? And I'm mainly pointing at the coaching staff on that one. Even if you're going, wow, Trent Brown, maybe not the best showing this week. I mean, Mims comes back probably pretty soon, right? And then you get Murphy back pretty soon. There are guys coming back, right? Where you go, okay, well, now we're getting to the meat of the schedule, AFC North games, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get this thing going. Reasons why I don't want to say pessimistic, but just worried is they made a big gamble on, hey, we're going to go committee by running back, defensive line, some of the other areas. And part of that is because we feel like we can recreate or even exceed past production with this group of guys, as opposed to one guy or two guys, that sort of thing. The problem is it's not equating. And the other problem is, I think they don't want to admit it, but there's a little bit of, they did that out of necessity a little bit because of the big contracts to Burrow, the big contract they're trying to get to Chase, and the franchise tag to T. Higgins. Well, that plan, when you see what was on the field on Sunday and it not really coming together as of quite yet, and you don't have the contract in place for Chase, that's where you go, what are we doing? Right. So that's kind of my big concern. I do think, again, you have immensely talented players at very important spots. It's just a matter of, okay, let's get the depth back. Let's regroup after this one. I don't really know what to expect at this point against the Chiefs. That could be an amazing turnaround and the Bengals surprise us, whether it's a close loss or a big win. Or it's going to be more ugly and they continue to try and find their footing. But those are kind of my points for optimism and pessimism at this point.
And we'll learn a lot about the state of this game as the injury reports come out. T. Higgins will be very much up in the air with the hamstring. Marquise Hollywood Brown. I forget the exact injury that he suffered, but it was in the preseason, and week 2 was always like maybe the earliest point where he could return. So the game can change a lot with the addition or just those 2 guys still remaining out.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get on out of here. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider, one of the shows on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel on the Believe Network. And hopefully you've been enjoying the content we've been bringing you the past couple of weeks. We've had Solomon Wilcots on the show, Eric All, rookie tight end Eric All. Hopefully he showed some nice things in the blocking game, by the way. He and Drew Sample showed some nice things in the blocking game this week 1. Hopefully they get a little more implementation this coming week here. But hopefully you enjoyed the conversations we had with both of them and the other shows on the channel, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, as well as 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. So get those and get it on your favorite audio streamer, namely iTunes for your podcast. So check that out, subscribe, and do all the things, do all the video things, etc. So subscribe, and we'll be back with more. I've got a car honking behind me. I don't know if you can hear that or not. So we're gonna get on out of here. Nothing like classy car honks, but John, thank you for everything, man. Let's hope for the Bengals turnaround here coming up.
Yep. Talk to you guys next week or this week later.